Step inside the mind of man with no time to lose. Cause he don't believe in time, he know what it's time to do. Get the breaking shackles, taking gambles, make him handle Jacob's ladder. Haters rampant, fake his fashion, fade his happen. Make a caption, change the channel. Take a stand and fade the castle. Make it fast, make it last. So baby, you won't make it past the first stage. Your story ended on the first page. What a fine group of animals the earth made. We've been locked since they put us in the first cage. So we lash out in a fit of earth rage. But I've been around since the first age. So I walk around the stage like a fucking maze. And you can reach for it only if you timeless. Or you can keep yours, but only if you spineless. Shit hit the world like I wrote Dutch. Cause it's split down the middle when there's no guts. Fuck a half full, half empty, fill the whole cup. I should be able to drink till I throw up. And a bunch of scary ass rappers with no nuts. All afraid to be honest cause they wanna blow up. But a man who's not built by the circle of time knows there's nothing worse than guilt. If shit comes back around, where did it really go? Think about it, drink about it, let it go. If shit comes back around, where did it really go? Think about it, drink about it, let it go. Be immortal. Keep it rolling.
Understanding the spiritual nature of the nations is of most importance when tracing the genealogy of men and the secret players of world history. We have continuously addressed the false ideology that all people of melanated skin have some type of ancestral relationship. Conversely, the opposite philosophy should also apply to this fact. This philosophy would assert that just as people of the same skin complexion aren't necessarily related due to this fact, people of the opposite complexion can share relation at a close ancestral level. For example, an indigenous lineage could become Caucasian after the span of 5 generations due to admixture. But what would a person of this genetic makeup be considered? The sliding scale of hybridized genealogy can be seen all throughout the earth. Probably the most significant factor for this change is European colonization. As a result, the Age of Discovery initiated the massive invasion of a specific brand of Japhethic bloodlines across the world. On the surface, one may consider these people distinctly different due to the variety of languages and supposed borders that divide these people. But as we have previously highlighted, the family histories and bloodlines have reached across these borders for millennia, virtually making each border representative of generationally held family tribal lands, whose proximity is no further away than your cousins down south or up north. Similarly, the Italians, Portuguese, French, Spanish, Dutch, Russian, and German are all distant cousins, as highlighted in the book of Jasher. Don't be mistaken, these men shouldn't be considered pure-blood Japhethites, if ever such a thing could possibly exist. Naturally, the Hamitic bloodlines in Europe ran deeper in the southern territories. But these people were also mixed with the blood of Shem and Israel under the ancestry of Esau. It was with these families with whom Edom would betray his brethren, as referenced in the book of Obadiah. Esau, or his lineage known as Edom, became the founders of Rome after his children escaped from Egypt and sought refuge in Africa under the empire of King Angeas. But how does one escape Egypt to flee to Africa if they are supposedly the same place? According to the book of Jasher, chapter 57, Esau on multiple occasions pleaded with King Angeas of Africa, the same as Dinabah, to send soldiers to Seir to overthrow the Horites from the land. The text states that the children of Esau dwelt in Seir in their stead unto this day, and divided the land into 5 divisions for the sons of Esau. It was at this time that the sons of Esau made a pact among each other, saying, they would not allow any of their brethren to reign over them, but a strange man who was not of their brethren, because the children of Esau were embittered, every man against his brother. From that day forward, Edom would not choose a king from their brethren, but one from a strange land, unto this day. As a result of this agreement, the children of Esau chose Bela, son of Beor, from the people of Angeas of Dinabah, to be their king. From this moment, Bela, son of Beor, was acting king of Edom, who dwelt in Seir. These events ran contemporaneously with the ascension of Joseph in Egypt. In the 13th year of Bela's reign in Edom, the children of Esau decided to go to war against Joseph, who was holding Zepho, grandson of Esau, in bondage, with the hopes of delivering him from the Egyptians. Bela, the king of Edom, called on the Africans for hired soldiers. As well, they enlisted the children of the east and the children of Ishmael to deliver their brethren from Egypt. The battle transpired in the city of Ramses, with the Israelites and the Egyptians destroying the children of Esau and killing King Bela in the conflict. Zepho faced even harsher captivity, and Edom would continue choosing their kings from other nations. After the death of Joseph, by some method, Zepho, son of Eliphaz, son of Esau, escapes Egypt and flees to Africa, to King Angeas, who immediately receives him with honor and makes him captain of his host. Zepho became popular in the sight of the people, and it will become a regular occurrence that Zepho and the people of Angeas would plunder Chittim. That was until Angeas heard about a beautiful damsel in Chittim named Jania. He immediately sent his people to investigate this woman, to which she was praised for her beauty. Angeas requested for her to be his wife, and the people of Chittim agreed. But Turnus, king of Bibentu, also requested Jania's hand in marriage, and he was ready to go to war over this. He had assembled his army and already intended on invading Sardunia, which was ruled by his brother Lucas, king of Sardunia. Angeas, king of Africa, and Lucas, king of Sardunia, met Turnus, king of Bibentu, in the valley of Canopia for a mighty battle in that location. The brothers pursued Turnus until his army was vanquished, and he was killed. Niblos, son of Lucas, king of Sardunia, was killed in the battle as well. And in that location there was built a high tower upon the high road, and they called its name after the tower of Niblos unto this day. And there also is buried Turnus, king of Bibentu, right beside Niblos. Angeas would go on to marry Jania. Verse 27, quote, "And behold, upon the high road between Alphanu and Romah, the grave of Niblos is on one side, and the grave of Turnus on the other, and a pavement between them unto this day." Unpacking these chapters can be quite difficult in relation to tracing genealogy to determine the spiritual character of the bloodlines. Character aside, this information is far more important in gaining contextual enlightenment into the hidden truth about world history, secretly lying within the uncomprehended pages of Scripture. In earlier episodes, we detailed the ruling families of Eurasia and Africa in order to acquire discernment among the innumerable titles, places, and people, some with identical names, some with dual names, and even some that blur the line between the meaning of a noun representing a person, place, or thing. Often clues are found in ancient mythology, as many will come to find. Parallel names and situations from classical Greek mythology are found within the accounts of the Old Testament. Take the story of King Angeus of Africa, aka Dinabah. His account has direct parallels to Greek or even Roman mythology. Even more so, the name Turnus has distinguishing parallels between his mythological narrative and the accounts from Jasher. As in accordance with the classical narrative, the story of Turnus states he was a potential suitor for Lavinia, who was the daughter of Latinus. In this example, Lavinia from Greek mythology represents Jania from the book of Jasher, who would eventually marry Aeneas, or Angeus, king of Africa. To add proof to this postulation, the burial place of Niblos and Turnus was marked by a high tower upon the high road near the valley of Campania between Alphanu and Roma. Most notably, the Leaning Tower of Pisa fits this description, as Naples sits between Roma, aka Rome, and Alphanu, or possibly Alfaro, Italy, if this truly is the Jasher-related territory of Alphanu. But philosophically, the towers of Bologna fit even better, because they were built upon a territorial crossroads corresponding with Jasher's description of the high roads. But even more compelling, the towers were built with a pavement in between, which is a direct parallel to Jasher. From this point, we will begin construction upon a tower of evidence proving Rome is related to Esau, and furthermore proving that Rome never collapsed, but instead rebranded itself into seemingly different nations. As many of you know, or should know, if indeed he ever existed, the person historically known as Christopher Columbus was born in Genoa, Italy, but sailed to America under the Spanish royal crown, funded by House Castile and Aragon of Spain. A simple connection can be made between this house and Rome. Charles V, head of the House of Habsburg, aka King of Germany and Archduke of Austria, meaning he is from the House of Esau, or at least a representative of Edom from a strange land, was not only Duke of Burgundy and Lord of the Netherlands, he was King of Spain and Holy Roman Emperor during the invasion of the Americas. Speculation has abounded that there is a possibility that Charles V was actually black. The pre-Columbian kings list of the Inca Empire lists Carlos V as one of its kings, as well as Carlos V being a Mexican candy brand under the ownership of Nestle, aka the King of Chocolates. Chocolate, of course, being indigenous to America. And being the Archduke of Austria and the title Duke being a title specific to the Holy Roman Empire, a direct connection can be drawn between Rome and Esau using the book of Genesis chapter 36. It's important to note that Duke or Archduke is a title of nobility rather than royalty. For all intents and purposes, it is a proxy title, non-indicative of absolute power. This title is also a unique characteristic of the Holy Roman Empire, where Duke has less authority than the emperor or king, but more than a prince. Undoubtedly, the nation of Edom funded its betrayal in the houses of Chittim. Genetically speaking, these people's original post-flood progenitor is Japheth, father of Javan, father of Elisha, Dodanim, Tarshish, and Chittim, who through our own findings, we can validate these locations and bloodlines using particular information to draw concordance between geography and genealogy in the book of Jasher. Specifically, we will highlight areas of American colonialism and the admixture with certain Japhethic bloodlines. In addition, we will trace the true genealogy of the first indigenous Americans to live in the Caribbean and have contact with these so-called people. According to the historical narrative, the first explorers into the old New World were from the Spaniard-Portuguese lineage. Following the history of this area of the world leads us to mounds of information as possibly some of the most well-documented people on Earth since the RH invasion. In reference to RH negative blood types, the Basque people of Spain have the highest concentration of this population. The Iberian Peninsula, home to the kingdoms of Asturias, Galicia, Gaul, Leon, Granada, Navarre, Al-Andalus, Toledo, Valencia, and of course, Aragon and Castile. Though this area may be commonly thought of as Catholic prior to the invasion before 1491, when the Moors were expelled from Spain, this area was heavily Islamic. By the year 750, the Umayyad Caliphate had already extended into roughly 90% of the Iberian Peninsula. It should be well understood there was significant cross-Mediterranean gene flow during these centuries, leading the Spanish-Portugese bloodlines to have certain genetic markers on their affected populations in America. It should also be noted that the Moors and Jews who were expelled from Spain in 1491 shared a common ancestry, just as many practicing Catholics were secret Jews, aka conversos, as was Columbus. But also many of the ruling families of the Moorish Empire were secret Catholics, aka Moriscos. The Iberian Peninsula prior to colonialism was essentially a Muslim country whose origins can still be seen in the architecture, culture, and genealogy of Spain today. The so-called Jews of the Spanish Empire distinguished themselves aside from other crypto-Jewry in Eurasia, where Ashkenazi Jews identify themselves with Ashkenaz of Japheth. Middle Eastern Jews identify themselves as Mizrahi Jews, representing Mitzrayim, son of Ham, and Ethiopian Jews, Cush. The Jews of the Mediterranean identify themselves as Sephardic, which can be traced precisely to certain tribes and rituals from the Torah and Tanakh. While Ashkenazi and Mizrahi describe their biblical progenitors, the Sephardic set of so-called Jews are a bit more ominous. Chapter 17 records Israel's transgressions and the fall of the kingdom under Ahaz, in which the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon, Cutha, Ava, from Hamath, and from Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria. Following this transition, the worship of heathenized gods and images became the norm. Verse 41 states that these nations feared the Lord and served their graven images, both their children and their children's children, as their fathers did, even unto this day. We find that Adramelech, the god the Sepharvim burned their children to, is also the name of the king of Assyria's son, who smote his father the king with the sword after his men fell in battle. He and his brother Sharezer escaped to Armenia. Found in agreement with several biblical lexicons, the word Sepharad, or the prefix Sephar, is a direct interrelationship with the Iberian Peninsula, or more commonly known as modern Spain and Portugal. This is a prefix still used by these people today to distinguish themselves from other groups of so-called Jews. This Sephardic genetic marker played the most dominant role in the initial colonization of the Americas, as the first invaders were from these houses. And the first areas of invasion were the islands of the Caribbean. The Caribbean played the role of transportation hub and pit stop for the first colonialists, slave traders, and merchants from Europe. The islands would receive the first wave of Sephardic admixture, and from the Caribbean, South and Central America were soon to follow. When it comes to the pre-Columbian indigenous people of the islands, several groups are most mentioned by historians and geneticists, including but not limited to the Kalinago, the Lucaya, the Arawak, the Taino, and the Carib people for whom the sea is named. In concert with the most widely accepted academic narrative, the islands in the Caribbean were some of the last places on Earth to be settled by humans. When coming into contact with Spaniards, they were given the name Taino, in part due to their friendly initial meetings. This is not what the people refer to themselves as. Taino is a catch-all term used loosely to describe nearly all people of the Greater Antilles, especially the natives of Cuba, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Bahamas, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. By 1520, the Taino people, as they were called, had mostly died off due to the pigdemic of salmonella, often conflated with smallpox brought on by the Iberian invasion. Because of this plague, the remaining indigenous people of particular islands soon intermarried with these new Spanish immigrants. What came forth from this connection of culture was the birth of a hybrid Euro-Caribbean culture that still persists unto this day. But even more spurious is a hybridized image of the indigenous people who once inhabited these islands. The people referred to themselves as the Lucukari, meaning people of the islands. They eventually came to be known as Lucayans. While other groups were reclassified by academics due to slight differences in language and dialect, Spanish colonization brought near extinction to the Siboney and Lucayan population. Quote from a short account of the destruction of the Indies by Bartolomé de las Casas. Quote, "Does any of you know why it is they behave in this way?" And when they answered him, "No, unless it be that they are innately cruel and evil," he replied, "it is not simply that. They have a God whom they worship and adore. And it is in order to get that God from us so that they can worship him that they conquer us and kill us." He had beside him as he spoke a basket filled with gold jewelry. Here's the God of the Christians. If you agree, we will do aritos in honor of this God, and it may be that we shall please him, and he will order the Christians to leave us unharmed. They all shouted, "So be it, so be it." And after they had danced before this God until they were dropping from exhaustion, the Lord, Hatui, addressed them once again, saying, "Mark you, if we keep this God about us, they will kill us in order to get their hands on him. Let us throw him into the river." And they were all agreed. so they threw the god into a great river nearby. The same Cacique lord knew the Spanish and their ways only too well, and fled from them once they arrived on the island of Cuba, only resorting to outright resistance when they actually tracked him down. But eventually he was captured, and although his only crime was that he tried to escape the clutches of these cruel and iniquitous monsters, because he knew only too well that they were out to kill him, and that if he did not defend himself, they would hound him and all of his people to death, the Spaniards' verdict was that he should be burned alive. Once he was burned at the stake, a Franciscan friar who was present, a saintly man, told him as much as he could in the short time permitted by his executioners about the Lord and our Christian faith, all of which was very new to him. The friar told him that if he would only believe what he was now hearing, he would go to heaven there to enjoy glory and eternal rest, but that if he would not, he would be consigned to hell, where he would endure everlasting pain and torment. The Lord Hatui thought for a short while, and then asked the friar whether Christians went to heaven. When the reply came that good ones do, he retorted, without need for further reflection, that if that was the case, then he chose to go to hell to ensure that he would never again have to clap eyes on those cruel Christians. End quote. From a short account of the destruction of the Indies by Bartolomé de las Casas. Another population commonly mentioned in the pre-colonial history of the islands were the Carib people, mostly consisting of populations in the Lesser Antilles. The main difference in characterizing each of these groups in the Caribbean is their linguistic ancestry and naturally their genetics. Yet before we go any further, this point cannot be overlooked. Grasping the genetic ancestry of the indigenous Carib or Taino is a principal variable required to solve the equation needed to debunk the false idea of African American ancestry. Where did the pre-Columbian indigenous ancestors of the Carib, the Taino, and the Lucayans originate? Was it Africa or somewhere else? If we were to look at what the scholars call a Taino or Carib today, we could only assume Siberia or even the caves of Cappadocia. One point is for certain: these people do not resemble the people who inhabited the islands prior to Portuguese partition. Numerous genetic and anthropological studies have attested to the fact that the pre-Columbian ancestors of the indigenous Lucayans, aka Taino people, and the Carib people originate in South America. This may seem a surprise given the majority of the so-called black population is attested to be a direct product of the transatlantic slave trade. Quote, from origins and genetic legacies of the Caribbean Taino. Quote, ancient DNA has revolutionized the field of archaeology, but in the Caribbean and other tropical regions of the world, the work has been hampered by poor DNA preservation. We present an ancient human genome from the Caribbean and use it to shed light on the early peopling of the islands. We demonstrate that the ancestors of the so-called Taino, who inhabited large parts of the Caribbean in pre-Columbian times, originated in northern South America, And we find evidence that they had a comparatively large effective population size. We also show that the native components in some modern Caribbean genomes are closely related to the ancient Taino, suggesting that the indigenous ancestry in the region has survived through the present day. End quote. From origins and genetic legacies of the Caribbean Taino. The main characterization difference between the two predominant ethnic groups in the Caribbean are their language families, Kalinago of the Carib people and Arawak of the Taino people. Both of these groups, however, have ancestral origins on mainland South America. The origins of the Carib are said to lie north on the coast of South America, in the countries of Suriname, Guyana, Venezuela, Colombia, and a few limited areas as far south as Brazil. The Caribbean language family is spoken as far west as the Colombian Andes. Their genetic history shows significant gene flow from these coastal areas on the northern shores to the islands of the Lesser Antilles. In comparison, the Arawakan language family encompasses several groups in these areas, and after generations of movement and divergence, the people distinguished themselves into separate groups in separate locations. The Taino mainly refers to the indigenous people of the Greater Antilles, and Carib is used to label the people of the Lesser Antilles and the people inhabiting the northern coast of South America. But how do the Spanish-Portugese bloodlines play a role in the recent histories and genealogy of the Caribbean, Central America, and South America? And additionally, how does this so-called West African ancestry play a role in the genome of modern-day Caribbean populations? Quote, by leveraging information from shared haplotypes, we infer the timings and proportions of ancestry contributions to Latin Americans since the colonial era. While previous work has suggested Globetrotters' inferred dates are robust to using different surrogates to the true ancestry sources, inferred proportions of ancestry inevitably depend on which surrogate groups are used.
In other words, be highly skeptical of this so-called science because there's some fuckery involved.
It has been estimated that Brazil received 4.2 million African slaves, about half of those brought to the Americas, while Spanish America altogether received about 1.5 million. However, the average sub-Saharan ancestry in the full Candela sample is relatively low, less than 4%. Probably reflecting the fact that regions which historically received large numbers of slaves are underrepresented in this sample, particularly for Brazil, which was sampled mainly in the south of the country. Altogether, 22% of the individuals studied show more than 5% African ancestry. SourceFind infers a marked predominance of the West African subcomponent, particularly in the Spanish-American countries, consistent with the previous genetic analysis. And with the historical information, the distribution of dates involving sub-Saharan African admixture mostly overlaps with that for Iberian admixture.
Mostly overlaps with that for Iberian admixture.
Although a substantial proportion of recent dates were also inferred, possibly reflecting continuing African admixture in the regions sampled. East Asian ancestry in the Candela dataset. Other than the major Native American, European, Mediterranean, and Sub-Saharan African ancestry components, historical information indicates some East Asian migration to Latin America, particularly after independence in the 19th century. SourceFind estimates East Asian ancestry in the Candela sample to be on average very low, less than 1% in Brazil, Chile, Colombia, and Mexico, and slightly higher in Peru, 1.4%. In individuals with greater than 5% East Asian ancestry, this component is inferred to be closely related to the Chinese and to a lesser extent the Japanese, except in Brazil, where the opposite is found. These results match historical records documenting the arrival of Chinese laborers to Peru since the middle of the 19th century, and Japanese laborers to Brazil since the early 20th century, reflecting the relatively recent nature of these events. Globetrotter estimated dates for admixture involving an East Asian source were significantly more recent than those involving Iberian sources. End quote. Basically, this study is saying that the Asian admixture in these areas, the quote-unquote Mongoloid features, are from less than 10 generations ago, most notably the 19th and 20th centuries. So the idea that these East Asian features are indigenous to these areas has been debunked by science. East-South Mediterranean ancestry in the Candela dataset. SourceFind finds that Sephardic East-South Mediterranean ancestry is detectable in each country's samples. Brazil 1%, Chile 4%, Colombia 3%, Mexico 3%, and Peru 2%. Altogether, 23% of the Candela individuals show greater than 5% of such ancestry, an average of 12.2%. And in these individuals, SourceFind infers this ancestry to be mostly Sephardic, 7.3%. With smaller non-Sephardic East Mediterranean 3.9% and non-Sephardic South Mediterranean 1% contributions. Individuals with Sephardic East-South Mediterranean ancestry were detected across Latin America. It is possible that outliers with particularly high values of Sephardic East-South Mediterranean ancestry are descendants from recent non-European immigrants. For 19 of 42 individuals with greater than 25% Sephardic East-South Mediterranean ancestry, genealogical information up to grandparents identified ancestors born in the East Mediterranean, thus validating the source find inference. However, no recent immigration was documented for other individuals, including all Colombians with greater than 5% Sephardic ancestry, despite these Colombians showing the highest estimated Sephardic ancestry across countries, 10% on average. Furthermore, Globetrotter estimates for the time since East-South Mediterranean admixture were not significantly different from those involving Iberian sources, consistent with most of this ancestry component being contributed simultaneously with the initial colonial immigrants. Jewish communities existed in Iberia, Sepharad, since Roman times, and much of the peninsula was ruled by Arabs. In conclusion, the results presented here exemplify how historical events have finally structured the genetic makeup of Latin Americans and provide insights into the complicated dynamics and timescales of intermixing among different continental groups from the colonial period up until recently. Our findings illustrate how genetic analysis can contribute to building a fuller picture of human history. This is particularly the case for poorly documented events, such as the clandestine migration of recent Christian conversos of East-South Mediterranean ancestry to colonial Latin America. Furthermore, our analysis show how regional genetic variation subtly shaped by history can impact on the genetic architecture of complex phenotypes across major geographic regions. We demonstrate how this regional genetic diversity can be analyzed in admixed individuals with ancestry from various sources, an encouraging result given the ubiquity of recent admixture in worldwide populations. Our results underline the importance for a fuller exploitation of genomic data of a broader description of human genetic and phenotypic diversity than is currently available. A further complication is that some of the reference populations may have experienced admixture following the colonial period. For example, it is possible that the Iberian reference individuals examined here have less non-European, i.e., East-South Mediterranean and/or Sub-Saharan African ancestry than individuals migrating to the Americas during the colonial period due to more recent admixture with other Europeans. In this case, source find may overestimate the contributions from the non-European groups. Because of this, estimates for each of the East-South Mediterranean and African components should be interpreted as values over and above those present in the present-day Spanish-Portugese reference individuals examined. As noted above, the similarity in the inferred dates for admixture involving East-South Mediterranean versus Iberian ancestry furthermore suggests that the individuals carrying this excess East-South Mediterranean ancestry migrated to Latin America during the colonial period. By leveraging information from shared haplotypes, we infer the timings and proportions of ancestry contributions to Latin Americans since the colonial era. While previous work has suggested Globetrotters' inferred dates are robust to using different surrogates to true ancestry sources, inferred proportions of ancestry inevitably depend on which surrogate groups are used. In general, our source find inference suggests that the reference populations included in this study are good surrogates of the true ancestral sources, as demonstrated by the preferential matching to specific geographic regions of Iberia and the strong correspondence between geography and ancestry matching in the native component. A caveat to this is that some of our reference native groups evidenced strong genetic drift, and source find inferred negligible contributions from such groups. Indeed, of such drift as post-Columbian, the extant native populations may not represent well the pre-Columbian natives that admixed with immigrant settlers. Indeed, of such drift as post-Columbian, the extant native populations may not represent well the pre-Columbian natives that admixed with immigrant settlers. DNA from the remains of pre-Columbian Native Americans could shed light on the extent to which this might be the case. End quote. What this study asserts is that there was a massive immigration of Sephardic Jewry from the Iberian Peninsula, so dramatic it can easily be seen across the continent in several locations in the Caribbean, Central, and South America. This immigration, by all historical accounts, was done secretly or clandestine, and essentially excluded from the narrative of American colonization. The first so-called invaders to the Americas were bands of Sephardic Jews. Are the majority of so-called black people from the Caribbean truly West African? If this were true, why do the indigenous origins of these people hail from South America? Would it be easier to transport slaves from Africa across the Atlantic or from South America across the Caribbean? Several renowned anthropologists and archaeologists assert that pre-Columbian Brazil had millions of people, yet the colonial record only details slaves brought to Brazil and none taken from. What happened to these millions of people? We know now through the use of modern genetics the founding populations of the Caribbean have a distinct place of origin. And these genetic studies say that the so-called indigenous surrogate groups that participated are not an actual representation of the Arawak originators. Yet, whenever these people are propagated to the public, they are shown as the classic Cauco-Siberian false depiction of the first Americans. According to the accounts of Catholic missionaries, the unfriendly tribes, distinguished as Carib, opposed to Taino by the Spanish, were allegedly cannibals. Of course, the allegation being made by men who burned their children in sacrifice to Babylonian gods doesn't necessarily mean it's completely untrue. But their flesh might need to be seasoned with a few grains of salt. However, it is well documented within Scripture that the ways of heathen nations flourished in the latter days, as was such the spiritual consequence for the downfall. Why were Sephardic Jews the first Europeans to immigrate to the Americas? And if they were secret Jews, aka conversos, as was Columbus, why were they militarizing Catholic doctrine? Did they even believe in Christianity, or were they using it as a weapon? Because if they did believe in Christianity, why were they conversos? Why does the trace history of West African DNA in the Americas chronologically overlap with that of Sephardic Jewry? Other than the obvious, what clandestine connection do they have to West African DNA? If the current population of so-called indigenous Taínos have minimal relation to the ancestral Arawaks, but more significant relation to Asian immigrants from the 1800s, how did those Asian immigrants supplant the Arawak geography and gene pool? How much of the contemporary hybrid DNA of Caribbean people contains Sephardic ancestry? And how much of that Sephardic ancestry carries a West African genome? From the available archaeological evidence, it appears the indigenous people of the islands were either wiped out or forced out, and the current quasi-indigenous population supplanted them in the last 200 years. But why has this mass Asian transferal of non-native populations been hidden from the historical narrative? And why are indigenous South Americans only mentioned in the peopling of the Caribbean and not the Indians from North America? The answer to these questions and more on the next episode of The Smartest Beast in the Field.